This is GB News.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Good evening. It's 8 o'clock and I'm Lawrence Fox. Tonight we will be discussing the UK government blocking the SNP's attempt to indoctrinate children into changing their gender. Then yet more cancellations and apologies for the woke army to salivate over as they drag you to the scaffold for cancellation. And finally, the execution of British Iranian ex-politician by Iran has been condemned around the world. I will be speaking to his nephew about him and why it happened. But first, the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Lawrence, thank you. The top story on GB News tonight. Scotland's First Minister has called the UK government's decision to block the Scottish gender bill as a full frontal attack on the Scottish Parliament. Nicola Sturgeon's comments follow Westminster choosing to use a Section 35 order which stops a Scottish bill from becoming law. The bill was designed to make it easier for people to change their legally recognised gender, and it allows trans people to obtain a gender recognition certificate without a medical diagnosis. In other news today, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner has apologised to victims after a serving police officer has been revealed to be a serial sex offender. In a tweet, Sir Mark Rowley said David Carrick should not have been an officer. Carrick has pleaded guilty to 49 offences relating to 12 women. Over 24 counts of rape were admitted to over a 17-year period. He's due to be sentenced next month. And earlier today, Baroness Casey, who's conducting a police standards review, urged the Home Secretary to hold a full inquiry. Suella Braverman has called today a sobering day for the police service.
This appalling incident represents a breach of trust. It will affect people's confidence in the police, and it's clear that standards and culture need to change in policing, and that's why I'm driving forward changes to support the police and to support chief constables around the country in doing so.
Thousands of teachers in England and Wales are to stage 7 days of strikes over the next 2 months. 9 out of 10 members of the National Education Union voted in favour of action during February and March. The union met the 50% legal turnout required by law to go on strike. The government's offered a 5% pay rise, but the union's demanding an offer which is above inflation. And nurses will go out on strike for another 2 days next month as its dispute with the government over pay fails to reach a resolution. Members from the Royal College of Nursing will strike on the 6th and 7th of February. Nurses at 55 trusts in England are planning 2 days of action this week, but next month could include union members from 73 trusts. The RCN has been calling for a pay rise of 5% above inflation, though it says it would accept a lower offer. The UK Health Security Agency has issued a severe cold alert in response to Arctic conditions sweeping across the UK today and tonight. The Met Office issuing a yellow warning for snow and ice across parts of Northern Ireland, northwestern England and North Wales until midday tomorrow. Snow will also continue to affect northern Scotland until Wednesday. And meanwhile, an ice warning's been in place for southwest England overnight tonight, stretching until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, including Devon and Cornwall. You're up to date on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. You're with GB News. More now from Lawrence Fox.
Two weeks ago, the Metropolitan Police sent a letter to a man who made a Twitter video mocking the new-look Wembley Way, which carries our fans back and forth to the National Stadium. The video reveals a sea of flags lining the route as far as the eye can see. Not Union Jacks or St George's flags, mind, but other flags. Holy flags, all in their radiant glory. This man, who committed the video, had also committed the heresy of mocking this flagathon, and his Twitter apostasy was picked up by the police, who were on the case immediately. I personally found his comments crass and distasteful, but none of that is the point. They are not illegal. The Metropolitan Police wrote to this sinner and informed the man he was required to attend a voluntary interview, which is mildly confusing, owing to the fact that required and voluntary are literally opposites. But the plot thickens. The letter stated that he was required to attend this interview for breaching an Act of Parliament which doesn't even exist. The police referred to this pretend piece of legislation as the Malicious Communications Act of 2003. But they may have got confused in their determination to get to the bottom of this case, whether they were referring to the Communications Act of 2003 or its predecessor, the Malicious Communications Act of 1988. Ooh, lots of maliciousness here. We may never know. It matters not. Why get bogged down in petty foibles like the law? The man had committed a sin of mocking the flag. And the police were going to stop at nothing to defend the flag's rights. I personally struggle to see how you can communicate maliciously with an object. But again, in the land of being kind, just days before the start of the third most important month in the woke calendar, after Pride Month and Black History Month, the ultimately sacred LGBTQ LMNOP Pride History Month of something or other, and something needed to be done, and done quickly. Pity the fool who in any way objects to this political policing or dares to point out to the Rozzers that their time may be better spent doing their job the public pay them to do, which is to solve actual crimes instead of policing our minds. The Metropolitan Police, like so many forces around this country, has their very own anti-racist Rainbow Brigade, and they police with an iron fist. Which brings us rather uncomfortably to Dave Carrick, or Bastard Dave, as he was referred to by his colleagues, a 17-year veteran of the Met Police's firearms unit, 17 years during which he used his status as a police officer to groom at least 24 women, which he's admitted to so far, before raping them. He did this unhindered, despite coming onto the police's attention and their radar 9 times during his time within the force, 24 rapes so far for Bastard Dave. Decades of abuse, 9 unanswered calls for help. So one wonders what the officer slumped at his desk, scrolling through social media for rainbow hate, might have achieved if they had instead used their time to take a closer look at the list of complaints made against Bastard Dave, one of their own. We will never know. Or failing that, what crime said officer might have prevented if they had been outside on the beat near a church in Euston last Saturday afternoon when a 7-year-old girl was gunned down in a drive-by shooting before being rushed to hospital in a critical condition. First Wayne, the rapist Cousins, as he was referred to by his colleagues, clue in the name, you would have thought, and now Bastard Dave. The Met are now looking into more than 1,600 cases of alleged sexual violence within their own ranks, and yet they still have time to go after a man who hurt the feelings of a flag. When the police are so fast to investigate those who mock the rainbow cult than they are to investigate the very real, in-your-face criminality of their own, how can the public have any confidence in them? And speaking of confidence, it has evaporated in the National Health Service, as a major news survey today reveals that 67% of the public think it's doing a bad job. I can't imagine shutting the whole thing down for a couple of years did them any favours, and we still have that very awkward 50,000 lives lost out of nowhere and the complete and utter silence from the government upon it. There will be no remembrance wall for those lost souls. Some lives are more important than others, it would seem. They are just the collateral damage, the cost of the power grab on our civil liberties and the right to ask hard questions and express valid opinions, even in the Houses of Parliament. So, I wish to report a crime. Our institutions have been taken hostage by a political ideology so pure and so glorious that we must worship and spread the good news in every available moment. An ideology which preaches inclusion whilst promoting division, an ideology so perfect that millions are spent each year in the police and in the health service to pay for diversity, equity and inclusion commissars, there to ensure observance to it. One wonders if these lost diversity millions will have been better spent on someone to investigate Bastard Dave and his heinous ways, or whether some of this wasted cash can be spent on an investigation as to why there are 50,000 more people 6 feet down than there should have been in 2022. One thing we do know is that if we want to preserve our culture, then we need to surgically remove political posturing from our Treasury of Public Services and national institutions. But first, with the UK blocking the Scottish Gender Recognition Bill, I'm asking you, do you think devolution will ever be enough? Email me at yourviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at LozofFox. The reason we ask is because of the SNP's Gender Recognition Bill. It looks like the UK and Scottish governments are headed for a Supreme Court showdown. This is a historic first where the UK government will invoke Section 35 of the Scotland Act, which would stop the controversial Scottish law taking effect. Nicola of the North has claimed the decision is an outrage and has claimed the government are using trans people as a political weapon. I believe psychologists call that projection. Anyway, joining me now for both sides of this debate is the teacher, Debbie Hayton, and the human rights campaigner, Peter Tatchell. Good evening, both of you. Debbie, could I start with you? What do you make of this?
Well, I think Nicola Sturgeon's been using trans people as a political weapon, if I'm honest. We were living quite happily in society 4 or 5 years ago, but then this row has appeared and we've been dragged into a political debate which we never wanted to be. Our rights have been hauled through the media. What we're seeing here is the Scottish government, well, the Scottish Parliament apparently has moved beyond its level of competence, and the UK government has rightly said, no, you're not allowed to do that because it interferes with reserved matters, which are purely the business of the UK government.
Interestingly, that trans people perhaps would like to be less visible, not more visible, to get on with their lives.
Well, yes, that was always the idea of transition. You transitioned in order to be able to get on with your life in peace, not to be part of an active political debate, which was seemingly to actually undermine some of the basic foundations of society, what it means to be a man or a woman.
Peter, good evening. What do you make of this?
Well, I think this decision by the Scottish Secretary and the Westminster Government is a direct attack on trans people and, most significantly, or equally significantly, Scottish democracy. The government is saying to the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish people, you have elected MSPs, you've elected a Parliament, you've passed this bill with a huge majority, 86 to 39. The legislation has been through years of public consultation and debate, yet now the British Parliament, the British government, is going to usurp a devolved matter which was agreed with the devolution settlement 2 decades ago. That tears up devolution, and I think it's going to fuel further demands for independence, because the Scottish people rightly say, we elected our Parliament, the Parliament voted, and now Westminster is vetoing. And it's absolutely wrong. This is not a matter on which the Westminster Parliament was ever supposed to have the right of veto. The Scottish Secretary says that the legislation is in violation of the Equality Act. It is not. And the fact that he's not spelled out how it's in a violation of the Equality Act, I think shows that he's just pacing for time and using this as an excuse to try and justify a very bad decision which tears up the devolution agreement of the 1990s.
Well, Peter, that's a very technical takedown of the government's position, but surely it's something much simpler than that. It's the fact that a man can identify as a woman without diagnosis of body dysmorphia or anything anymore and live just for 3 months. Surely we're talking about something very simple here, not as complicated as, we're not going to break up the United Kingdom over transgender people, are we?
Well, I think the Scottish people will be rightly very angry that their democratically elected parliament is being usurped by Westminster on an issue where there are supposed to be no usurpation powers. Now, the issue of trans people is very simple. There are differences between a biological woman and a trans woman. They're different, they're not the same, but both deserve equal rights and equal respect. And this legislation is simply going to give trans people the right to change their gender through a self-ID via a statutory declaration that is an instrument of law that is legally binding. So anybody who whimsically takes out a self-ID trans identity and then violates it will be open to prosecution. This system works well in other countries. There's no reason why it can't work in the UK as well.
Debbie, I was reading through these trans legislation in countries across the world, and I was actually very moved by the Argentinian story of this very small minority of people who 9% of them have jobs, a lot work in sex work. Should we not be doing more to protect trans people?
Well, you've brought in the case in Argentina. We've got different issues going on here, Lawrence. Trans people in the UK were a different demographic to prostitutes in South America. It's a very risky environment to be in. Now, whether it's because they're trans or they work in the sex industry, who knows? But what we're looking at here is something happening in the United Kingdom, where trans people are not oppressed. We're not specifically harassed as some victimised community. We're not. We hold down jobs. We're well protected by the law. What's happened in Scotland, though, is that the Scottish Government has actually moved on something which does affect the Equality Act. Alistair Jack is right. If Peter says that trans women and biological women are different, and that is true, but the Gender Recognition Act itself, if I chose to get a GRC and actually use that act, I'd be legally indistinguishable from a woman. All my paperwork, including my birth certificate, would say female. And what that means is that service providers are unable to distinguish between me and a woman. And if I've been born in Scotland and I apply for a Scottish GRC, the fact I live in England doesn't matter. So it is affecting issues across the United Kingdom, is this. And because of that, it's not a matter which is just affecting Scotland. And that is the reason why it's right for Alistair Jack to invoke this. Now, Peter also talks about the effect on the union. But self-ID, polling in Scotland says that self-ID is unpopular. So appealing to the people of Scotland may be very interesting. It could break the union, yes, but it could also make the union if the people of Scotland see that there are two governments here. They have two governments, one of which knows the difference between a man and a woman and will protect women's rights, and the other one which doesn't seem to know.
Peter, surely that's a very good point, to be able to say that this, you're taking someone, you're completely affecting their entire history. You're rewriting their history. Is that not I mentioned the Argentinian case, but you look at Spain, and Spain is looking to anyone who's over 14. So are we looking thin end of the wedge, thick end of the wedge? Debbie's got a point, surely, here.
Well, Debbie is wrong when she says that trans people are not oppressed. All the research shows that trans people have much higher rates of prejudice, discrimination, hate crime, domestic abuse and sexual assault compared to the general population. And that means that we rightly should seek to protect them and to do everything in our power to ease their lives. The idea that simply by amending
breaking up the union.
Well, no one wants to break up the union, as far as I know, on this issue, but that's what might happen. So we have to be very careful about unintended consequences. And I think that when it comes to trans people, they're simply asking for dignity and respect. Now, Debbie reflects one point of view, but she does not reflect the majority trans view in this country.
But how can you say that you speak for the majority of trans people in this country, Peter?
Well, I don't. I'm merely reflecting the research and the evidence given by trans organisations and individuals to public consultations here in England and Wales and in Northern Ireland and in Scotland. It's very clear the majority of trans people want this gender reform bill to go ahead in Scotland. They want it extended to Northern Ireland, England and Wales. They are responsible, respectable citizens who deserve our support.
I don't think anyone would question that trans people deserve our respect and dignity and support. I think I would like to offer the last word to Debbie. Debbie.
Well, trans people don't necessarily want this legislation to go through. Gender recognition is a very remarkable piece of legislation. It allows us to change our birth certificate to pretend that we're the other sex. And if you open that up to anybody who wants to do that for whatever reason, then you're going to attract the people who want to imitate the other sex and want to circumvent the safeguarding that the other sex has in place. And when you do that, the whole system risks being brought into disrepute. We are trans people. Other activists can disappear onto some other campaign, but we'll be left here with a system which is possibly in disrepute.
And thank you very much, Peter Tatchell and Debbie Hayton, for joining me this evening. Right. Anyway, when we're back, we will be talking about Jeremy Clarkson and his right to apologise for his comment about Meghan. Was he right to apologise? Well, it has been reported that Amazon are likely to part ways with Mr. Clarkson. Didn't see that one coming. The apology was all for nothing. I will be back in 3.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents. Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
A little too late. Amazon is likely to part ways with Jeremy Clarkson after final commission shows of Clarkson's Farm go to air. This comes after Clarkson issued a public apology to Meghan and Harold about the Sun column he wrote. You remember the one where he compared Meghan to that Game of Thrones reference? This is his apology. Let's take a look. I'm really sorry, all the way from the balls of my feet to the follicles on my head. This is me putting up my hands. It's mea culpa with bells on. So, Jeremy is truly sorry. And apparently he's so sorry he's gone grovelling to the Sussexes via the medium of email. Or maybe he had it hoped it would save his Amazon show. The question is, does this apology just make it worse? This is essentially an admission of wrongdoing and gives all those who criticised him a nice big stick to beat him with. Here to discuss this, thank heavens, is General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, Toby Young. Toby, we've both got into situations whereby we've demanded to be demanded an apology from. Good idea, bad idea?
It usually makes things worse, Lawrence. So when I was targeted by a Twitchfork mob, when I was appointed to a government regulator at the beginning of 2018, people dredged up things I'd said on Twitter, some things I'd written dating back at least 30 years. A petition was started, signed by 220,000 people, demanding that Theresa May sack me. I had a mob of journalists on my doorstep. And in the end, I thought the only way to make this stop, to make it go away, to save my career, would be to apologise. So I issued an apology and hoped that would draw a line under it. Turned out that was the worst possible thing I could have done. That was like throwing a piece of raw meat to a shoal of piranha fish. The feeding frenzy just intensified. The mob then came for me in 4 other roles, and I ended up having to step down from 5 roles in total. The apology just multiplied. It made it 10 times worse. It was just seen as a sign of weakness by the mob, and I'm afraid that that's what's going to happen in Clarkson's case. And
he's minted, though. He's absolutely minted. Why is he apologising?
I guess he's hoping that Amazon might reconsider what apparently is their decision not to commission any more series of Clarkson's Farm or his version of Top Gear for them. Grand Tour, and maybe he's hoping that he'll be able to save his gig at ITV. I was going to read the Duke and Duchess's response to the apology. Believe it or not, they haven't said we accept it, all is forgiven. Come round to dinner. No, they've said Jeremy Clarkson has a long-standing pattern of writing articles that spread hate rhetoric, dangerous conspiracy theories and misogyny. Not an isolated incident shared in haste, but rather a series of articles shared in hate. So that's their gracious response to his apology. It's made no difference at all. They're just doubling down on their performative outrage.
This is the worst. This is why I decided when I messed up and told the truth. I prepared and I went, I'm never going to apologise for telling the truth. And, OK, I think Clarkson's language was it was a bit hardcore, but, you know, these people do make you feel like that. Do you think it's time for you and I to apologise?
Well, I have been thinking about this, Lawrence, because I mean, to Meghan, for all the mean things we've said about Meghan, I mean...
Would you like...
well, hold on. Just to be clear, you know, Meghan likes to portray herself as a bit of a victim. You know, a bit put upon, a bit vulnerable.
Some people might say she has been victimised, Toby.
Well, maybe they might well say that, and she might well say that. But you know, it's beginning to look as though, far from being this vulnerable, fragile woman who is easily hurt by hurty words, if you cross her, you get into an awful lot of trouble. She's so far now, she got Piers Morgan basically fired from Good Morning Britain for questioning the veracity of some of her remarks in her Oprah interview. She's now done
he
for...
He was a bit obsessive, though, Piers. To be fair, I can understand people that dislike Meghan, but Piers was pretty much
OK, so Piers crossed Meghan off our screens, reduced to appearing on another channel. Clarkson now in all sorts of trouble. You know, you can imagine Ricky Gervais at the Golden Globes picking out Meghan in the audience, taking the mickey the next day, you know, finding he's lost all his gigs, including all his Netflix specials. I mean, she's all-powerful. If you cross her now, she's like the Queen of Hearts, you know, off with his head.
So what's our reaction? I mean, first of all, would you like to apologise to Meghan on screen? Because I would.
Well, I'd like to say... Meghan, I'm sorry from the balls of my feet to the follicles on my head. Actually, hang on. That probably doesn't work in my case.
It's insincere. You can tell he's not telling the truth. Meghan, I'd like to say that I do actually sympathise with some of the stuff that you've been through, but please just go away. Anyway, what's the answer to this stuff? What are we going to do? How do we return to a world where you can apologise, the apology is accepted, and we respect and encourage people to apologise? Because our kids are going to have to grow up in this cancellation culture. And if we don't teach them that that an apology well meant is truthful, what do we do?
Well, I think the reason apologies, even if well meant, and, you know, Clarkson sounds sincere in his apology. He says that he thinks it won't make much difference. He's already probably lost his Amazon gigs, but he's going to apologise anyway. And he wrote a personal note to Harry on Christmas Day and the rest of it. He seems sincere. Nonetheless, his apology hasn't been accepted. And I think this tells us something about the woke left. You know, they're incapable of forgiveness. They've taken some aspects of Christianity, but they've left the best parts by the side of the road, like the ability to forgive, giving people who've sinned the possibility of redemption, of being readmitted into your kind of community, into your church. That's not there in the woke church. Once you've sinned, you're out. You're permanently ostracised. And that intolerance, that inability to forgive, that inability to distinguish between the sin and the sinner is one of the most unattractive things about this quasi-religious cult. So I think, you know, if we're going to move on from here, if we're going to become better as a society, we need to accept people's apologies. If they've done something wrong and they genuinely apologise and they mean it, you know, then we should accept their apologies, let them back in and move on.
But does that involve a non-secular religion? You know, because we've got the secular religion woke and no redemption, no repentance and no salvation. Is it time that we started encouraging our kids in traditional faith?
Well, my hope, Lawrence, is that in the same way that Christianity used to be quite intolerant and quite unforgiving, but became, after the Reformation, a bit more tolerant and a bit more forgiving. So there'll be something like a Reformation in the woke church, and they will in due course learn to be a little bit more forgiving. I mean, if they don't, they're all going to end up falling out with each other. One of the characteristics of the woke is they're constantly turning on and attacking each other for kind of being insufficiently pious, for not taking the knee fast enough and the rest of it.
Okay.
You know, if Clarkson is prepared to take the knee to Harry and Meghan, which is what he appears to have done today, I think they should be gracious about it and say, OK, Jeremy, up you get, on your way, we accept it, we all make mistakes, we're all human after all. But instead, it's like, you're a hate monger, get out of our sight.
I'm terrified of the prospect of a reformation of the woke church. You've just basically given me a sleepless night.
Oh, sorry about that.
Toby Young, thank you very, very much for joining me. Right, the NHS is at breaking point. The YouGov poll has found that voters are losing their faith not only in the NHS but in the government with their handling of our health service. Coming up, we'll have former non-executive director of the NHS, Graham Smith, on this. Pop the kettle on, see you in a view.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you know, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. This is the People's Channel, so let's channel the people. Earlier I asked you, will devolution ever be enough? David says no. Independence is the answer. All right, David, no changing your mind then. Alan says, The Scottish people didn't vote on this, so stop the democratic talk. Daniel says, exactly. Slippery slope, fiefdoms all over the country. each with their different laws. Ken says, I live in Scotland and I don't know one single person, including SNP supporters, who agreed with this bill, so we're all very happy that Westminster has stopped this madness. Paul says, devolution has been an unmitigated disaster. For too long, the SNP has gone unchallenged. Their arrogance is legendary. 3 cheers for Rishi and the Tories. Oh, what? 3 cheers for Rishi and the Tories? Today, polling has revealed that 85% of voters thought the government was handling the NHS badly. This comes after record-breaking hospital waiting lists and ambulance delays have affected people across the UK. Reports have also revealed that 50,000 more people than normal, yes, we're not going to stop talking about it, have died in the past year. The National Health Service is at breaking point, and who is to blame for this? Here to discuss this with me is former non-executive director of the NHS, Graham Smith. Good evening, Graham. How are you doing?
Not bad. How are you?
I'm worried about this public confidence in the NHS. What's going on?
Well, I think the public are quite right to be concerned about the NHS, but the problems with the NHS have only been exacerbated in the last couple of years by COVID. The problems with the NHS are deep-seated and are the problems that you find in all institutions in the country at the moment. At the moment, equality of outcome is the paramount importance to all people within the NHS. All power has been taken away from people, from patients. The NHS talk a good game about providing patients with choice, but patients don't have any choice. And anyone who has had the misfortune of having to deal with NHS A&E or GPs over the last few months can provide good evidence towards that.
But there was an interesting bit in the in the story that said those that had actually experienced the NHS recently were quite confident. OK, yeah, so those who'd used health service were more likely to be satisfied with the care they'd received than unsatisfied if they'd actually used it. 63% versus 32%.
Yes.
So look, I think we all agree that the NHS, all's not right in the NHS.
Yes.
But, you know, we surely we've got to put some support and love towards these people that are working their beeps off every single day for us lot.
Yes.
You know, I've never had, for example, a bad experience in the NHS.
No.
In fact, I've had completely the opposite almost every time.
Yes, I mean, well, of course, everyone's experience will be different. I would say 63% is not a particularly high number. So 4 out of 10 people who are using the NHS aren't having a good experience.
Conservatives wouldn't mind having 63%.
Well, no, absolutely. And it's very easy to trash the NHS. And the NHS is full of good people, well-meaning people. I think that the NHS, the problem is more cock-up as opposed to conspiracy. But a lot of money is chucked at the NHS and people do deserve better. People do deserve to get better outcomes. We lag behind most Western countries when it comes to cancer survival rates. As you mentioned earlier, 50,000 excess deaths. That really isn't good enough. COVID, I left during the COVID pandemic. I was horrified by some of the decisions that were made during that time. It seemed to me that if you had an illness that to most people would seem much more serious than COVID, such as cancer or heart problems, that you had to take a back seat while everyone stayed at home and the NHS tried to solve
that was a government
COVID.
Policy, wasn't it? So we can't blame the NHS for that. It feels like we need a new beginning in some way.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people with a lot of views on this. What would a new beginning look like for you? Would the pay dispute being settled be a good start?
I think if I could change one thing about the NHS, and it will never happen because it's enshrined in law, all NHS money is public money. I don't see why you can't combine public money with private money and insurance money. There seems to be 3 sources of 3 ways you can fund a nation's healthcare, and we decide as a nation to only use taxpayers' money. Second thing I would do, if I was to have a second, I would give more choice to patients. I would allow patients to have a choice about what GP services they use, and if you allow patients to have more choice, you create competition. And creating competition creates better services, in my mind.
I'm sympathetic to what you're saying in terms of the fact that, because the NHS is ultimately a socialist model,
Absolutely.
isn't
It is a
that it
socialist
is
model.
equality of outcomes.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, as in all socialist models, you pour a huge amount of money into
Yes.
it and nobody gets anything decent out of it.
Yes.
But I think to humanise the frontline workers...
Absolutely.
My personal view is I have this sort of fantasy in my head that there is some manager somewhere who hasn't done a day's work in 5 years, who's still picking up a cheque from the NHS.
Yes.
I feel like we should recall all of them to London who aren't doctors and nurses and surgeons and ward sisters and all of this. Anyone who's in an administrative role, and get them to re-explain what the role is to us.
Yes.
And then if it's not needed, sack them and give the money to somebody else.
Yes. I mean, I've worked with a lot of NHS managers, and they're all well-intentioned, and they're all good people who think they're doing good things. And indeed, the NHS actually spends less on management compared to other sized companies. I mean, the NHS is a monolith with over 1 million workers. Actually, the percentage it spends on management isn't that high. I think it's more the ideology behind the managers that creates the problem. It is a left-wing collectivist idea that permeates all parts of the NHS. But it's not just the NHS. You see it in other walks of life in the public sector as well. So I would give it, the NHS is very much a top-down organisation. You should be made a bottom-up organisation. The way you do that, and to be fair, the Lansley reforms under David Cameron, they did try and do that. They failed, and it hasn't succeeded. But the aim has to be to give patients more choice. They talk about choice, they talk a good game about choice, but they don't see that if you give people choice, people are going to make different choices, and then you're not going to have a quality of outcome. We have to accept that people are going to make different choices and they're going to be worse outcomes because of that.
Well, there we are. It's kind of ironic because it's like power to the people.
Yes.
You know what happens to the people that say power to the people? They're doing the other things. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me on. Thank you very much.
Right. Coming up, a British Iranian citizen has been executed in Iran after being accused of espionage. His nephew joins us from Luxembourg to discuss the policy implications of such a decision, and I don't think you'll want to miss it. Back shortly.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Steyn. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dubes & Kerr.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Welcome back. Whilst it's easy to get caught up in the hysteria of social justice and microaggressions or misgendering, there are actually real people across the world genuinely struggling for actual basic human rights. You know, the sort of things we take for granted, like being able to wear whatever you like. A prime example of such would be Iran. Back in September last year, a young girl was arrested for the crime of refusing to wear a hijab, but simply wearing one improperly. Not refusing to wear it, just wearing it improperly. She was brutally beaten by the police, according to eyewitnesses, and died in their custody. Protests erupted across the country and are still ongoing. Well, Iran, being that lovely liberal democracy that they are, decided to start executing protesters. And then, just 2 days ago, executed a former government minister who also happened to be a British citizen, named Alireza Akbari. We contacted the Iranian government for comment, but funny enough, we didn't hear back. The British government have sanctioned one individual, and that's about as far as it goes, unfortunately. Perhaps it's time to withdraw from the ongoing Iran nuclear deal talks, perhaps? Fast-track the designation of Iran's armed forces as a terrorist organisation? Well, joining me now is Mr. Akbari's bereaved nephew, Mr. Ramin Forghani. Welcome and good evening. I'm very sorry for your loss.
Good evening, Lawrence. Thank you for having me, and thank you for the kind words.
Obviously, it's a very difficult time for your family. Do you feel the UK did enough to help your uncle?
It is a difficult time. It's been quite shocking since Tuesday evening last week when the news became public and the British government went public on the case. They tried to influence Iran's decision on the execution. Unfortunately, it wasn't successful, and we were made aware that on Saturday, that the execution has taken place. The British government's moves in terms of diplomatic activities that they did in order to impact the decision, I think the UK government, Whitehall, did all they could, to be honest. Unfortunately, we are dealing with an unsavory regime that has no regard, has nothing that matches today's international norms in terms of human rights. On the other hand, the regime doesn't recognize dual nationality where it doesn't suit it. Obviously, it does recognize dual nationality to a concept that now has become to be understood as hostage diplomacy. So they take dual nationals and they try to influence international politics by giving them fabricated cases and sentences.
And what do you think the UK can do to show support, solidarity with the Iranian protesters, or should we be staying out of it?
The British government has already asked the Chargé d'Affaires of Iran in London to go to Whitehall to express the anger of the British government towards what has happened. The British ambassador has been recalled from Tehran for consultation, and the Prosecutor General has already been sanctioned. He's the person that does give death sentences on high-profile cases. So I think by far the moves that the British government has made have been strong and sufficient. But what matters from this point forward is to continue with the pressure. I think the British government shouldn't forget what has been happening in Iran for the past few months since the death of Mahsa Amini for improper hijab. Many Iranians have been subjected to death and tortured over the past few months. We also shouldn't forget other dual nationals are awaiting their sentence in Iranian prisons. I think a strong next step would be to permanently expel Iranian diplomats from London and recall the British diplomats from Tehran to send a strong signal to the Iranian regime that this behavior is not acceptable. And Britain has been hanged. We shouldn't forget that. On the other hand, yes.
And the mood of the Iranian people obviously is febrile at the moment. And, we've seen protests erupt and then calm down. Do you think that these protests that have begun again will escalate? Do you see the future of Iran returning to something with the resemblance of a democracy or not?
The signs are showing that this round of protests are different. The people are fed up, to be frank. They have had enough of all sorts of limitations and hardship that this regime has imposed on them over the past 4 decades. I think this round is going to reach a point that will impact the regime. Hopefully, it will lead to the collapse. If not, they will hopefully impose some severe changes in their behavior.
Right. And overwhelmingly, do you think the Islamic Revolutionary Guard should be made a terror group? What can be done here to shake up the West and to get the West involved and on side with you in a real way rather than in a rhetorical way?
The organization was sanctioned, was recognized as a foreign terrorist organization by the United States a few years ago during the Trump administration. It was about 2 weeks ago that the case became public by one of the media outlets in the UK that the British government is considering enlisting the organization as a terrorist group. We had last week in the House of Commons, a majority of the members of Parliament expressing their interest for enlisting the IRGC as a terrorist organization. I think it's an important step because it is a malign organization that for the past 4 decades has created havoc throughout the Middle East. And through that, it has impacted the UK and the wider Europe. The operations have not been limited to the Middle East. We shouldn't forget that. They do conduct operations within the European soil, within the British soil as well. So I think it is important that the UK government continues with that decision and limits the activities of the IRGC.
Thank you so much, Ramin, and again, sorry for your loss.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Right, well, up next is Dan Wootton. Dan, what do you got for us?
Lawrence, good evening to you. I'm going to continue that very fascinating debate that you had earlier between Debbie Hayton and Peter Tatchell. The great Neil Oliver is beaming in and he's got a lot to say about scheming sturgeon, let me tell you.
Well, that's all. Great stuff, Dan. And coming up after the weather is the Dan Wootton Show. You won't want to miss it.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. Cold winds from the Arctic have arrived, bringing overnight a widespread frost, snow and ice for some, but also clear spells for many. The winds at the moment coming from the north and passing over, well, relatively mild seas, and as that occurs, they pick up quite a number of showers. Those showers predominantly affecting those areas exposed to the north wind, so northern Scotland.